There is no fair media in America any longer. I'm not fair. I don't profess to be fair. I give you my opinion. That's all I do. I don't report facts. I don't read news stories. I give you my opinion of today's relevant political / cultural / societal topic. We enjoy doing that here. But we're not in the business of reporting fact and data and analysis to the point that we consider it to be news. Let's just declare today that version that you and I become so familiar with is dead. It no longer exists. There is no news in America today. The New York Times is not a newspaper. It's an opinion paper. The Washington Post is not a newspaper any longer. It's simply a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. CBS News is not news any longer. It has an objective. It has an ulterior motivation. It wants to advance an agenda. It believes in a more liberal and government-ridden America. So let's kind of get there. In our self-evaluating and our introspectiveness, let's just take that as a start. We're not dealing with news any longer. So when you know you're not dealing with news any longer, guess what happens? Your expectations change. You don't expect the anchor of the CBS Evening News to be fair and impartial. You just kind of go in with the idea, okay, I know who he is and what he's up to. And it all began with Dan Rather and George Bush. Remember the made-up story? And a lot of the media celebrated Rather because why? Because the made-up story was worth trying to get a Democrat elected.
Yeah, but back then, Dan Rather still basically had to pay the price.
Sure he did. He got fired. But that's not. But we don't live in that area anymore.
That was then.
We don't live in that area anymore. If Dan Rather were to do that today, he would be acclaimed. He would be given some Pulitzer Prize. I'm serious. I mean, he would be declared a national hero by the American political left because he was trying to save the country from another Republican getting elected. So let's establish that. So in other words, let's not really complain about the media any longer. Let's just accept the reality that we know who they are. They are a propaganda arm and a cheering section for the American political Democrat Party. That's what they are. I think that's who they've always been. They've just been able to hoodwink us for a pretty good while. And I think Trump, if nothing else, has really shown and clearly demonstrated exactly who they are and what they're about and what their motivations are. But I think it's essential that we understand that when you make a monumental mistake like the media and the Democrats have made, that there's got to be some self-awareness. There's got to be some accepting of responsibility. But there's not. The only person that you and I have heard that has said, yeah, maybe I got it wrong, has been one of the most unlikely suspects, and it is former CIA Director John Brennan. Brennan was on Morning Joe yesterday. Now, he's got a crutch. He says he was given bad information. Well, my mind immediately goes to, so Brennan's still plugged in with people within the investigation. Brennan still talks to people within the investigation, or Brennan's simply a liar. I mean, one or the other, because we've been told that there were no leaks for 2 years. Now, that's BS because there were some intentional leaks trying to kind of get ahead of a narrative or a story. In fact, that there was one event where Mueller felt compelled to release a statement on behalf of the special counsel. In other words, the media had gotten so far out there that Mueller felt it appropriate that he offers some opinion or commentary telling everybody to pump your brakes, man. I mean, that's kind of where we've gotten. And it's a radical left. It's an out-of-control Democrat Party that is as power-hungry as any political party I've ever seen in my life. It's all about the power. It goes back to what Lindsey said in the Kavanaugh hearing when Lindsey said, good God, you folks want power worse than anybody I've ever seen, and I hope you never get it. Well, that's what this was about. The power to destroy an American president. Didn't matter if they have to lie, cheat, and steal. That's kind of the way we do things in America today. But John Brennan on Morning Joe yesterday did offer up, it's probably a minute-and-a-half version of what he thought he knew and what ended up being reality. Let's play that, Rev.
All right, let's
Because
stay
they could not
focused.
talk about women on sex.
Director Brennan, I'm just curious, Mr. Director, how surprised were you by the findings yesterday, by the conclusions that were drawn? And I'm just curious, did you receive bad information throughout this process, like so many of us did, that there was more there than ended up in the report regarding collusion?
Well, I don't know if I received bad information, but I think I suspected that there was more than there actually was. And I am relieved that it's been determined that there was not a criminal conspiracy with the Russian government over our election. I think that is good news for the country. And I still point to things that were done publicly or efforts to try to have conversations with the Russians that were inappropriate. But I'm not all that surprised that the high bar of criminal conspiracy was not met. I am surprised at that second part of obstruction of justice in terms of how it came out. I don't know whether or not Bob Mueller wanted the Attorney General to pronounce on that issue, or whether or not Bob Mueller felt that it would be best for Congress and American people to determine whether the weight of the information indicates that Donald Trump did try to obstruct justice. So there are some surprises there, and that's why I think getting to the full Mueller report is the best way to get some of these, if not all of these questions answered.
All right.
See, that goes back to my comments. I mean, if you're never made to defend your position, you have a weak opinion of your position. The Republicans, every time they face the media, are challenged at every corner. Why do you believe what you believe? Why do you stand for what you stand for? Why do you want this policy to be law of the land? Why do you want that policy to be law of the land? The Democrats are never challenged.
They'll even play back, you said this 2 years ago.
Sure. Well, I mean, the interesting comment to me, and I wrote it down, is that Brennan said, I suspected more. I'm not sure I had bad information, but I suspected more. If I wanted to be a conspiracy theorist, I'd really dig into that word. Well, what does he mean by I suspected more? See, I believe Brennan had a lot of informal conversations with people who were familiar with the investigation because they're all part of this deep state that has been so easily identified now. And if anybody out there, and I remember people like Glenn Beck several years ago talking about the deep state, and I'd turn the radio. That's Glenn Beck, man. I mean, that's kind of his thing. He's always been a conspiracy theorist. But if you're somebody, and I tip a hat, I tip my hat to those who have always said, you better watch it, man. I mean, there's an absolute element in Washington, D.C. that has far more control over our lives and well-being and our political process than you ever imagined. You don't know them. You never vote for them. You never see them. They live in neighborhoods all along Alexandria, Virginia, Bethesda, Maryland, and some of the outskirts of Washington, D.C. And I think if you've ever doubted for a second that there is indeed a deep state, an organized, influential cadre of people who basically abuse their privileges and authorities of being entrenched in certain important government agencies, I think there's a new dawn of that. I'll bet you, Rev, if we did a poll of, 3 years ago, what is the deep state and who are they? Do you believe in the deep state? I think few Americans would have a sound, informed opinion. You'd have the conspiracy theorist. You'd have the folks who everybody else considered to be the kooks out of the mainstream. If you ask that question today, what is the deep state? I think it would surprise how many people would know. Now, they'd have a lot of different definitions of what the deep state is, but I think the second question, do you think it's real? Do you think it's far more pervasive than you originally thought it was? I think the answer is emphatic, yes, absolutely. Do I believe there's always been a rogue agent or two within our federal government? Of course. I mean, there are bad apples in every sort of part of the economy, whether it's public or private sector. But I think that people are beginning to now find out that there is indeed an element entrenched within our federal government that cannot be trusted to do the right thing by the American people. They're agenda-driven. There are certain things that they like. The things they like are giving government more power, and anybody that perceived or is perceived as being a threat to the garnering of more and more influence and power, they perceive those people to be a threat, and they can justify just about anything they do because they believe that they're ridding the political system of somebody who's unfit to be there because they're one of the betters. Once again, they're better pedigree, they're better educated, they're just better. than the rest of us. And they're the people entitled to be in charge of government. And Trump is the only legitimate threat these people have ever had to deal with. Trump walks to the beat of his own drum. Trump's a rich man. Trump's an old man. You know, Trump doesn't have to leave there and get a lobbying job. They can't threaten Trump with a lot of anything. Trump doesn't care. Trump doesn't need Washington. Trump doesn't care much for Washington. He can just do what he wants to do, when he wants to do it, and how he wants to do it, and that absolutely obliterates the political norm. Because they can normally take somebody in the Senate or the House who wants to be a rebel rouser or a troublemaker, and they say, look, you better settle down. What are you going to do when you leave Congress? What are you going to do when you leave here or leave there? You're going to interact with bureaucrats. You're going to be a lobbyist. You're going to be a consultant, aren't you? Isn't that the plan? Well, with Trump, there is no plan. There is no next phase of his political life. This is it. I mean, this is it. This is all there is for Donald Trump politically. He is the president of the United States, and he didn't run for an office before he became president of the United States, and they don't know how to deal with him. So instead of trying to rationally reason and process and introspectively evaluate, they tried to overthrow him. And here we are today with no indictment, no collusion, no obstruction, and a president that I think is empowered like no American president has been empowered in a long time. And I'll say it, and I'll say it every day from now until then. I hope he has a vengeful heart, and I hope he seeks retribution, and I hope he holds the people accountable for launching an illegitimate investigation that consumed 2 years of American energy, force, and might. And I hope we find out who those people were.
And hold them into account.
And hold them into account to the nth degree. Back in a minute. Good morning, PD, Live 95.